Hello everyone, this is Dr. Supriya Singh, Assistant Professor in the Department of English, Vasant Kanya Mahavidyalaya, affiliated to Banaras Hindu University. I welcome you to the lecture 3 of third week, and the title of the course is Understanding Deconstruction, a Critical Approach. And the title of today's lecture is The Key Concepts of J.H. Miller. So let's proceed with the lecture. Let me tell you that J.H. Miller is actually one of the prominent critic who belongs to Yale School of Criticism. His complete name is Joseph Hillis Miller, who was born on March 5 in the year 1928 and died in the year 2021. He was an American literary critic and a scholar who proceeded with the theory or the idea of deconstruction belonging to the Yale School. He had keen interest in the ethics of reading and reading as a cultural act. Let me tell you that he died from COVID-19 on February 7th and 2021 when he was 92 years old. He was part of the Yale School, as I told you just now, along with the scholars whom we have already dealt, that is Jacques Derrida, Paul Dimon, Geoffrey Hartman, and Harold Bloom, whom we have not yet discussed. So, he advocated particularly deconstruction as an analytical means by which the relationship between literary text and the associated meaning could be analyzed. Now, coming to the overview of Miller, let me tell you that it is in 1986 Miller left Yale to work at the University of California, Irvine, where he was later followed by his Yale colleague Jacques Derrida. And during the same year, he served as president of the Modern Language Association and was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award in the year 2005. He was a distinguished research professor of English and comparative literature at the University of California until 2001. After his retirement, he wrote over 15 books and many articles in journals and was also an active figure on the international academic platform. Throughout his career, he would go on to write over 35 books and many articles in journals, advancing in the theory of deconstruction. Now, coming to Miller's transition from new criticism to deconstruction, we can see that he started his career as a new critic, focusing on the close reading and the intrinsic properties of literary texts. However, his work underwent a major shift in the 1970s because it was the time when the work of deconstruction was going on and many critics were actively working on this new arrival invented by Jacques Derrida. So he too participated to work upon this theory and he encountered continental philosophy, especially the ideas of Derrida and Paul Dimon. Miller's work, mostly influenced by Jacques Derrida, focuses on deconstructing the seemingly stable meanings of text, and like other deconstruction critics, this involves identifying the internal contradictions and tensions within a text, revealing how meanings are constantly being destabilized and shifted. Now, coming to the hierarchies or the idea of binary opposition, let me tell you that Miller basically worked upon the idea of binary opposition regarding the text and the critical interpretation. Till now, it was believed that the text is something that is primary and critical interpretation is something that is based upon the text, so it was secondary. So, this traditional idea has been dismantled, or this traditional binary between the text and the criticism has been dismantled by J.H. Miller, and he gave the concept that they are co-independent. So He discarded the traditional criticism that has treated the text as primary and the interpretation or the criticism as secondary. According to him, primary text and critical interpretations are codependent. So he gave the idea of co-independent and in order to define the text and the critical works. So he does not see both of them as different. Rather, critical interpretation is also creative, very much equal to the primary or the text. The critic may reveal things in the text that the text itself doesn't fully control. So, this way, he breaks down the traditional idea that the critic should be hospitable and passive. Instead, according to Miller, critics should acknowledge the active, transformative role of themselves, and critics are always this way changing the text they engage with. Now, coming to the idea of ethical reading, which is again a very popular concept given by J.H. Miller. Let me tell you that ethical reading basically is something where he is shifting from the author to the equal responsibility of the criticism. And then now here when he is talking about ethical reading, he is shifting the responsibility of the readers also. So when he is talking about or when he is discarding the binary between the primary text and the interpretation or the critical text, he is shifting the idea from the author, which was there in the new criticism or in the traditional school. So he shifted this idea of responsibility of author to the responsibility of critics, which is very much the similar or equal. And now here when he is talking about ethical reading, he is now shifting towards the responsibility of readers. So here he is now coming with the idea where he talks of that there is some ethical responsibilities of the reader, particularly in a world where meaning is not fixed. He argues that despite the inherent instability of language, it is the reader's obligation to engage in critical thinking and try to understand the world around them. So it calls for a greater attentiveness on the part of readers. So this way, he's not only engaging the author, rather the critics, and now the readers too. According to him, reading ethically means engaging deeply with ambiguity, contradictions, and rhetorical play. Ethical reading involves, according to him, listening to the voice of the other, whether it's the character, the narrator, or even the absent figure in the text. It requires careful, patient attention and resisting the temptation to reduce the text to a simple message or ideological tool. So, this way, when every reader would be open to the interpretation, when a reader would consider it as his or her own responsibility to find out or to explore the inherent instability, then naturally a text is going to explore more and more within itself. So this way he talks about the ethical responsibility of the reader. He calls for ethical reading, and this way he says that now the reader is not just a passive recipient or decoder of the meaning. Rather, he sees reader as active and sees reading as an ethical act, a form of engagement that mirrors how we relate to others in the world. Now, another idea which is quite prominent with J.H. Miller is the idea of thread. So he talks of thread in the text, and here you will find that this particular idea of thread is very much similar to the idea of shuttle proclaimed by Geoffrey Hartman, because according to him, shuttle means, you can say, weaving, and text is weaving of language. So here also he has used similar metaphor and he talks of thread of the text. So according to Miller, he defined the ethical engagement with the text as searching for the thread in the text. While dealing with thread in the text, Miller resembles Hartman's idea, as I just told you, And similarly, he too considers thread in the text as a piece of fabric. For example, if one pulls on a loose thread, the whole thing might start to unravel. In the same way, when we pulls on a particular term in order to get the inner or the symbolic meaning or so, then we come to unravel the idea, another layer of interpretation of the text. So in this way, in literary terms, Miller is saying that every text contains something, a small detail, contradiction, rhetorical twist, or ambiguity that, when closely examined, undermines the apparent coherence or stable meaning of the whole work. That thread isn't something external to the text, rather, it's something already there, woven into its very structure. This is why Miller says the deconstructive reading is encrypted within the metaphysical one. The moment you start pulling at the thread, the whole thing starts to shift. So, here, when we are talking of the paying close attention to the language of the text, he means to say that we have to look for the metaphors, repetitions, gaps, or slippages, identifying the inconsistencies or tensions that the text seems unaware of. Now, following those small details to show that the text contradicts itself or that its meaning is not as stable as it seems. So, the process is actually not destroying the text but exposing how it destabilizes itself from within. Now we come to another idea of J.H. Miller, where he says that text is not the prison house of language, but instead they are a place of joy. This is one popular idea or concept given by Miller, where he made the case that words and text are not the prison house of language, entrapping a meaning, but instead they are a place of joy, where the critics had the freedom to associate and provide various possibilities, eventually guiding the meaning. He critiques the metaphor of the prison house, originally from Frederick Jameson's The Prison House of Language, which was written in 1972. And he suggests that we should approach the language with more appreciation for its generative and liberating powers. So, being a critic, he believes in the liberating and generative powers of the language. And perhaps this is the reason why he is talking of criticism as something that is equal to text. Now, talking of the traditional view, he says that the prison house of language suggests that language is something that traps us. We can never get outside of language to reach reality, truth, or pure meaning. We are stuck inside a system of signs that never fully correspond to the things they represent. From this angle, deconstruction might seem bleak, it might seem nihilistic, it might seem hopeless. Now, if words don't point to stable meaning, he comes up to rescue the idea by saying that even then, everything seems to be meaningless, hopeless, seems to lost in linguistic confusion. There is nothing like nihilism. Rather, he argues that just because of words don't have fixed meaning, don't have objective meaning, this doesn't mean that we are trapped. Rather, in fact, it's the quite opposite. If language has no absolute outside, then it becomes a space of freedom, of creativity, and of invention. So here he tries to save language from the nihilistic approach, because according to traditional idea of reading a text, it was considered that since there is no fixed meaning, since meaning is absent, therefore perhaps we are falling while reading a text to nihilism. But here he is trying to focus on the very opposite viewpoint, that here, when there is no fixed meaning, we are coming to be more creative, we are open for free play, and therefore we have lots and lots of opportunity for exploring the meaning. So we are not going for a nihilistic approach, rather we see that we are going for welcoming or engaging with various interpretations. So if language has no absolute outside, then it becomes a space of freedom, creativity, and invention. Critics and readers are not limited to right or wrong readings. Till now, there was an idea that there is something right or wrong. Interpretation may be right or wrong. But now, with this idea, he is trying to say that there is nothing like right and wrong. Rather, one is whether one is critic or one is reader, he is or she is free to explore several interpretations. They are hosts of the text, welcoming it, engaging it, interpreting, and playing with the text. So, this way, he comes up to the idea of joy of reading, because till now we had a very limited, monotonous sort of reading because we had just fixed, stable one meaning. But with creation, with invention, with endless play, we are now able to enjoy reading, and this he calls as the joy of reading. Miller finds joy in the multiplicity of language. Language is not like prison, but a playground with all freedom and creativity. So, here, referring to Derrida's difference, Miller says language differs meaning, but that very deferral opens up new interpretative possibilities, new connections, and new meanings. The critic is free to explore these, not to impose a single truth, but to participate in the ongoing event of meaning making. So, rather than mourning about the loss of stable meaning, Miller celebrates the vitality and openness of the text. For example, when we are coming to Bleak House, in this analysis of Bleak House, Miller focuses on the dual narrative structure where the story is told both by Esther Summerson in the first person and by omniscient third person narrator. So, here Miller's reading highlights that the novel sets up a contrast between subjective and emotional narration of Esther and objective and social narration of the third person. But Miller simultaneously argues that this binary breaks down because Esther's narrative is not fully reliable or coherent, and the third person narrative is oddly poetic and ironic, not as objective as it seems to be. So, this way, we cannot rely on both of them, and this way, we are coming to break down or blur the identity of the subjective or the objective reading. Now, this creates a rhetorical instability. The reader is left in a tension between different perspectives, unable to fully trust either. And this is something where Miller writes that the dual narration splits the authority of the text and renders impossible and univocal or unambiguous interpretation. So, according to certain critics, it is falling at nihilism. Now, again, Miller is coming to the idea that this way we can neglect or reject the claim of nihilism, because even as he affirms the instability of meaning, Miller doesn't claim that texts have no meaning, rather, they have too many possible meanings. Language is excessive and not empty. He often shows that texts mean more than they intend, not less than that. So instead of falling into despair or nihilism, Miller, opposite to it, finds this productive, even ethical. Now, his next approach is very much seen in the essay The Critic as Host. This essay is one of the popular one, or you can say that it is one of the most provocative piece which was published in the year 1977 in the anthology Deconstruction and Criticism. And as we have discussed that this one collection is where all the Yale School critics have written their essays. So here, the critic as host is the essay that has been contributed by J.H. Miller. Now, this essay explores the relationship between the critic and the text, the idea that we have dealt, that how he tries to mediate between the binary of the text as primary and the critic as secondary, and he mediate between this binary to bring them to an equal platform. So here, using a brilliant play on words and metaphors to rethink the role of the literary critic in a deconstructive framework has been highlighted by Miller, and he plays upon the word host, which can be seen in Latin as hostess. And this way, he comes up to the idea that host has dual meaning. It can be interpreted as a welcoming figure, as well as it can be interpreted as a hostile figure or an enemy. So here Miller suggests that we can take host both as welcoming the text, offering hospitality, as well as a parasite or enemy disrupting, consuming, or altering the text. Now, coming to the traditional view, Miller says that the critic was till now a host, a generous guide who helps the readers to understand a text. But with the arrival of the deconstruction, or with this approach, we complicate this idea, and the critic is now actually a parasite, feeding on the text, twisting it, transforming it, and is equal like a host. And this way, he is now coming to the two terms, that is univocal reading and parasitical reading, which is an interesting kind of idea or concept given by Miller. So when he is talking of univocal reading, it means that a reading where we can go for a one fixed meaning. But when we are talking of parasitical reading, he is comparing, or he is applying the metaphor of parasite upon critics, in order to say that critics not just interprets, rather twists, transforms, and lives on in the meaning making process in order to make it more creative, inventive, and transforming. So this way he talks of univocal reading, and while talking about it, he says that this term can be referred to the traditional straightforward reading of a text, often based on a single clear meaning, where Miller critiques the idea of single meaning, arguing that it ignores the complex and often contradictory nature of language and literary works. And so he has invented a term called parasitical reading, which is central to Miller's concept of deconstruction, where he refers to the way how a deconstructive reading parasitizes the univocal reading. It suggests that deconstruction operates on the surface meaning, revealing its underlying contradictions and instabilities. The deconstructive reading, this way, doesn't come from outside the text, rather, it is embedded in the text itself, like a parasite living inside a host, feeding on it, but also a part of it. So, when you look closely at the obvious reading, you start to find cracks, rhetorical contradictions, ironic turns, tensions, and so on. And these cracks are not external attacks but internal structural instabilities. Miller, this way, doesn't present deconstruction as a way just to destroy meaning, but to show that meaning is always interwoven, fragile, and self undermining. The obvious and the deconstructive readings aren't enemies, rather, they are codependent, like host and parasite, or even they are mirror images in constant dialogue. Now, apart from this, one most important thing about Miller is that he was one who is noted to have made the topic of deconstruction accessible to a wider audience. As we have already read so many terms regarding deconstruction, and we come to understand that how it complicates the idea, how it is quite obscure, that it is quite difficult for the common reading mass to understand the concepts. So it is Miller who made the concepts quite lucid using several metaphors so that it is now easy for us, for the common mass, to understand the ideas, the complicated ideas of the deconstruction. So Miller is considered as instrumental in making complex deconstruction of concepts understandable to a wider audience. His writings emphasize clarity, breaking down barriers between academic jargon and general readers, and thereby democratizing the discourse. So, unlike Derrida's famously labyrinthine writing or Demann's philosophical rigor, Miller wrote with a lucid, elegant language, and this way he was more engaging in his narrative structure as well as in tone that was inviting rather than intimidating. Basically, his essays and lectures often had a literary quality which are rich in metaphor, irony, and apart from this, we also find subtle humor, and this way he is able to connect himself with the audience. So, this way we come to see that the jargon, the academic jargon, comes to us in a more humorous and metaphorical tone. Miller has made the concept more graspable because of the idea that he has conveyed to us using certain texts. He applied deconstructive techniques to certain texts like Charles Dickens, Henry James's, Emily Dickinson's, Joseph Conrad's, or Thomas Hardy's texts, and this approach helped the readers to see deconstruction in action rather than just theorizing about it. So, till now, with Jacques Derrida, with Paul de Man, with Geoffrey Hartman, we come to understand more about the terms, the philosophical ideas, the concepts. But here, when we are coming with Miller, we see that he talks about the application of the academic, highly academic terms of deconstruction upon the text, and this way he made it more lucid and understandable. Now, apart from this, we see that this way Miller's insights reshape contemporary criticism by advocating for a reading practice that appreciates the richness and joy of language. By shifting focus from despair to exploration, his work impacts how texts are interpreted and valued in the modern discourse. So ultimately, we find that Miller is one who was talking not just about the idea of critic, rather from author to critics and to the responsibility of the readers as well as to the weaving of language in the text. He is talking about everything and made the idea lucid and reachable to the common audience. Thank you.